Alright, thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. In case it is unclear based on time, I am not currently in Germany. I am visiting the United States. I'm currently in Boston and I'm going to be in New York starting in 4 days. The reason I'm streaming right now and not in 4 days is I'm going to be on a train during stream time. And by in 4 days I meant in 3 days, on Tuesday. Both for the train time to New York and stream time. Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I'm visiting a very close friend who is getting married in about 3 hours, which is going to be a hard limit on the length of this video. And I love this friend dearly. I love their partner, but they do suffer from the flaw of voluntarily living in the Boston area. And to be clear, when I say the Boston area, I do not mean the city of Boston. I mean Cambridge/Somerville. Yeah. So but I'm going to be in New York, which is not at all commiserations. New York is nice. Anyway, obligatory slagging on Boston aside. There is not going to be a topic for this video, as I said before I started recording. It's going to be different. It's going to be a Q&A, and I asked on social media if people have questions for me, and they did. So let's start with Mastodon. Okay. Alright. So Matthias Wiesmann asks me about the image of public transport and points out that Belgrade decided to get new trams for reasons of image. Now in this case, this is now as I said in reply, it is common for poorer countries. Side note. Poorer countries in this case means countries that are not like first world. Let's draw the line so that Greece and Israel count as and Portugal, which is kind of the poorest, traditionally viewed as first world countries, count as first world, and things that are more than a little bit poorer than them do not. So that is a vast category, which includes things like the DRC, but also Turkey. So poorer countries often get second-hand equipment. I gave the example of Indonesia. Indonesia does not use standard gauge. It uses Cape gauge, same as Japan. So Jakarta uses second-hand Japanese trains for its commuter rail, and also has a very heavy investment in its commuter rail. Most of the public transport ridership in Jakarta, let me amend that. I'm not sure if it's most rail or also most formal public transport in Jakarta is the commuter rail, not the metro. And they're clearly learning a bunch from Japan and South Korea, which are very good places to learn from for very large cities. Again, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's preferred to have things that look shiny. So again, evidently Belgrade made that decision. I will also point out that sometimes places try to do it both ways. The example I can think of is Pyongyang. The Pyongyang metro uses second-hand East Berlin equipment, but scrubbed any notion that it was manufactured in East Germany from it, and is pretending that it is the domestic North Korean industrial base, which is kind of trash. So obviously image is a thing, and you want your public transport system not to look shabby. And I'm not going to say whether the decision in Serbia is good or bad, because I don't know Serbia well enough at that detail level, but there's certainly a thing where you don't want your public transport to give the impression that it's a hand-me-down kind of charity system for only for people who can't get new things. One of the reasons for the decline of rail transport after World War II, and I'm going to say something that's in the US and Canada. I don't know the British history of this well enough. The continental history would be very different because of physical occupation and destruction of infrastructure. This obviously is not something that affected the United States or Canada. That said, because the United States and Canada were still in total war, I don't know what proportion of Canadian GDP was military spending, but in the United States it was at peak 37%. This led to very heavy deferred maintenance of fixed plant, because if you're a skilled mechanic who could maintain trains, you were also a skilled mechanic who could maintain army trucks or half tracks or tanks or guns. And by guns I don't mean rifles. I don't mean like personal assault rifles. I mean artillery. And that led to undermaintenance of civilian infrastructure. And in Toronto, I think I've said it a couple times in video. There were PSAs telling the public, yes, the streetcars are kind of rickety. We're at war. You should expect this. War is not the same as peace. The upshot is that after the war ended, years of undermaintenance led to a very degraded physical plant, and they could have repaired it. Oh, yeah, okay. I guess also in Britain there was not that kind of destruction. I mean, yeah, obviously there was the Blitz, but let's compare how London looked at the end of the war and how Köln looked at the end of the war, for example. Paris was not bombed, but Paris was very, very heavily looted. So anyway, they could just buy new buses, and the buses looked and felt nice. Now, to be clear, looked and felt nice did not mean that they were actually nice. By the 50s, the effects of prostitution of streetcars in the United States on ridership became clear. Even the replacement of PCCs that had been bought from before World War II and had poor maintenance and poor handling and didn't have any of the features of modern light rail, like low floors. Replacing these with contemporary buses still led to a decline in ridership. But certainly why were they replaced? And one of the reasons is that they seemed shabby. And not just seemed, it wasn't that they were actually good, they were not. They were shabby. So you want equipment that's good. There is a thing, and this is going to be relevant to you, Martha, where it's often the case that within the same country there's a hand-me-down effect, and this is incredibly unpopular, where there was this idea to give some second-hand London rail equipment to some of the Met counties when they were electrifying their commuter rail. I don't remember which ones. I don't remember if it was in the West Midlands or Greater Manchester or Merseyside. I don't think it was in Yorkshire. I think it was like either around Birmingham or Manchester or Liverpool. But this was kind of unpopular, and the idea that it's kind of and the idea that it's kind of repulsive, and it kind of underscores the inequality, the interregional inequality within England in this case. In case Borners wants to correct me on geographic place name, just because Scotland doesn't do it by its name, that Birmingham and the North have to get second-hand London equipment. So that's definitely a factor, and you want to make sure that people perceive public transport as, let's call it, income appropriate. So what I mean by income appropriate is you do not want it to be a luxury product. when you do something that's only, oh God, I'm sorry. Um, like manual doors, not in the continental European sense that you need to press a button and then the door opens, like manual doors, like that you need to actually open the door yourself, right? Like in maybe 1950s metro trains, or older. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So you don't want your public transport to make people think, oh, this is an example of our poverty. Conversely, you don't want, and conversely about the image, you don't want it to be too luxury, too luxurious. You don't want people to say, this is an example of something that's only for the rich. And this is not something about image because the train will never look luxurious, by which I mean a train. So you can take, let's say, a subway train and a subway line, a normal subway line or a tram line, and put ancient equipment on it, and people will say, "You see, it looks shabby." You can't put equipment on there that will make people think this is for the top 1%, because anything that, let's say, looks too gilded will then suddenly become proof of something about public architecture. For example, in the Soviet bloc, they had, still have, very decorated, very well decorated stations, very socialist realist, and that is generally viewed positively. I believe that's still viewed positively even after, there's no more communism, and so the inequality, there's like quite a lot of economic inequality. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, you see, and so you want them to be income appropriate. You don't want, but for example, you don't want to only serve rich neighborhoods. You don't want to charge high fares compared with incomes. So you do not want to do what Eurostar or Thalys are doing and charging fares based on only the business travel market, because then it creates a mentality in which intercity rail is only for the rich, and for everyone else, not only in the market sense, that then it leads to bifurcating the market, as some entrants try to go after the low income market, and that reduces frequency on both, and often the low income market will not even be profitable. But also it leads to political demands to do something subsidized for the lower income segment. There are discussions about subsidizing slow trains between Paris and Brussels, on the slow lines, instead of just making sure that Thalys charges the same fares as domestic TGVs, which are not priced for backpackers, but they are priced for the average French person. And the average French person is not poor. The average French person is not the average unemployed French person. But populist demands don't generally come from unaffordability at the 40th, 50th, 60th percentile. Or rather, they do come from unaffordability. That they don't come from unaffordability to the poor. It's a pretty recurrent thread that populism essentially never looks at the bottom 20%. I will not be surprised if that is correct. I know that is the case for international trains within the EU. That there's this. I don't think it's a coincidence that John Worth is constantly talking about improving slow trains that nobody rides, rather than about building high-speed rail between France and Germany, for example. Oh no, I'm sorry. Anyway, so that's the issue with the image. You want the image to be income appropriate. You don't want to charge excessive fares, but you also don't want public transit to be like a soup kitchen, which is often how it's being designed in the United States, certainly outside the top few transit cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, DC, Philadelphia, Seattle, Boston. Elsewhere, generally, there's constant obsession with, is this appropriate for an NGO worker's idea of what poor people do? And that's never going to get you good outcomes. So that's the importance of image. Again, I'm not going to say whether Serbia made the right decision on this, but this is the thing. Okay, slow horses is trolling. I'm not gonna talk about the trolling. Let's go on Blue Sky and see how many people have flamed me for having any opinions on Israel and Palestine. None today. Okay, this is me complaining about how the Popular Front in France is not a united front, and the Popular Front and Macron's people are just not going to cross-endorse against the extreme right. Attal is on the Macronist side. Yeah, no. I denounce all extremes. I also think that, let's face it, NUP or whatever they call themselves is annoying. They're not, and please vote accordingly. Okay, now I want to segue to this issue, which is metros for countries that are for cities that are not the primary. Because I started talking about how Jakarta was learning from Tokyo, maybe Seoul, and that is a very good thing to do for a city the size of Jakarta. Now, evidently, the secondary cities of Indonesia have garbage public transportation ridership, and it's not even a matter of absolute size at this point. I think it's relative size because Surabaya and Bandung are vast. Metro Surabaya is possibly 10 million people, and if it's not, then it's not much less. Bandung probably also a little bit less than 10 million. Like, these are cities that are bigger than Berlin. They don't have metros. I don't even know if there's a Surabaya metro. Is there any plan to build one in Surabaya? Okay, so it does concern me that Surabaya metro doesn't get me to... Okay, so this is the commuter rail map for Surabaya. This is the ridership. To put things in perspective, in Tokyo, scale to population, this would be the daily ridership. Daily ridership in Tokyo, with double counting people who transfer between operators, is slightly higher than the population of the metro area. Here, the annual ridership is slightly higher than the population of the metro area. Okay, and it does not appear urban transit in Indonesia, Jawa. They do not have metro in Surabaya. Okay, good to know. Okay, the high-speed rail service, that's okay, whatever. Bandung, yeah, same thing. It's similar to Surabaya, yeah. These are Nagoya-sized cities. Chicago-sized cities. Almost Paris-sized cities. So there's definitely a primary versus secondary issue here, which is, again, it's not just a matter of absolute size, because, again, Surabaya and Bandung are vast. Nagoya is also vast, but Nagoya has a couple subway lines, pretty solid commuter rail. I mean, it's not Tokyo and it's not Osaka, but it's also not Los Angeles. Okay, is this people flaming me or no? And so this is kind of the difference, because this is, I think, I'm not going to say East Asian thing, because in China the primary versus secondary difference is kind of weird. Like, is Shenzhen a primary city? There's definitely a thing where in Asia, when you have success with public transit, it's only in very large cities. Even cities that have a couple metro lines, like Sapporo or Busan, Sendai, they're much weaker than comparable population cities in most of Europe. For example, these are cities, I mean, certainly when you compare them with primaries in Europe, so with things like Warsaw, with Stockholm, Praga, but also when you compare them with cities that are not primary, by which I mean things like München. Now, maybe you can say that there's no primary versus secondary distinction in Germany. Okay, valid. Lyon has 2.5 million people, the metro area. It is in an extremely centralized country. It has 20% it has 20% public transport model split, which is it the same as Paris? No, it's not. Paris is 40 something. But 20%, to put things in perspective, is more than any American city that is on New York. It is okay by Canadian standards. Like the main Canadian transit cities at this point is Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. They were all low 20s on the eve of Corona. Yeah, okay, so yeah, Nagoya, yeah, exactly. Nagoya is, I mean, Nagoya might look bad because it's, I mean, we're comparing it with Tokyo and Osaka. Also, Toyota is in the area. Like, it is more auto-oriented than Tokyo and Osaka, but the model split in Nagoya is not terrible. I mean, maybe relative to its size if you're comparing it with London and Paris, I don't think its model split is worse than that of the Rhine, which is also very, I shouldn't say it's also very decentralized, much more decentralized. So, that's partly just, I think, the Japanese way of building public transit was always designed to be very Tokyo-centric. And that ported well to Osaka, it ported well to Seoul when South Korea learned from them. When Taiwan started learning from that, it also worked down to the scale of Taipei, which is much smaller. The reason Taipei has a weaker public transit system relative to its size than, let's say, Seoul, I don't think it's absolute size. I think it's just higher construction costs that lead to a smaller system. Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair. I mean, bear in mind, Munich gave me a certain feeling, and Sid a much bigger feeling of being auto-oriented after we got used to Berlin. Like there's more. I mean, we walk around city center, and there's visibly more parking, more space for cars, and it's not even freeways because it's not like there are motorways. It's just, or maybe there are, but not certainly not in city center in Manhattan, but somehow there was more space. There was still more space for cars and parking in München than in Berlin. Oh, okay, yeah. Because I imagine JNR focused on Tokyo and Osaka. Um, Now, bear in mind that all of these institutional problems of excessive focus on the center, that's a thing. They also exist in England and they also exist in France. Now, the model split in the Met counties is about 15%. Oh, okay, but I mean, there's a pretty solid JR West network there. It's not just Kintetsu. Um, and again, and the model split in Lyon is about 20, and the model split in the other secondary French metro is about 12, 13, 14, 15. And the model split in Kaohsiung is, I think, 10. I'm forgetting, I think maybe it's even worse in Taichung. And I don't know what it is in Busan. We can like check ridership, Busan Metro. That is, okay, so that is about 100 per capita, which honestly is not terrible. I mean, it's way sub-Seoul, but it's not terrible. Okay, that's metro only, so that's without Busan, Gimhae, and Donghae. Are you going to tell me what the ridership is? No, it doesn't look like. Ugh. Design capacity, okay, but doesn't tell me how much actual there is. Okay, anyway, so the... Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, you mean what it inherited is, yeah, okay. Yeah, fair, but, right, but anyway, the issue with this is that, the, okay, maybe the French way is just weird, because in France, I talked a lot about the French way of building rapid transit, but France has specific everywhere except Paris innovations for how to scale down, and they don't work as well as in places where there is no Paris, for example, Germany, slash Switzerland, slash Austria, or the Nordic countries, or Czechia, or Poland. But they do, for example, use VAL type systems, like, I guess I don't pronounce VAL, where the idea is to have automated trains that are smaller to reduce costs. They use that in Italy a lot, very aggressively with some Milan metro lines. Milano, I think lines 4 and 5 in Milano are both that. And in Brescia it's the same thing, and in Torino it's the same thing, where they're using very small trains in order to reduce station construction costs, and the and capacity is compensated through building an automated system where you can run trains extremely frequently. We're talking every much less than 2 minutes at rush hour. Vancouver did that, but in Vancouver it was experimental, and in provincial France it's systemic, or in Italy. And yeah. Yeah. No, in the UK they're clear, and I'm saying UK and not England on purpose. Don't flame me. They don't have even the, let's call it the French style of how to build when you scale down, which I don't think they have in Japan either, or anywhere that's learning from Japan, or in China. In China, they have huge full-size metros, which work really well if you're in Shanghai or Shenzhen or Wuhan or Chongqing. Like, it's not just for the first few cities. Like, there's a pretty long list of very large cities in China. But then in Hohhot, it's not producing very much. And I guess also in the smaller cities, there's also the issue of like very large roads, so it's very easy to drive there. Whereas when you do that in either in cities that are already big like Shanghai, or when it's something like Beijing, where yeah, you have these enormous ring roads and everything, but you also have like the number of cars for a metro area of 20, 25 million people, so you need more than that if you're trying to fill everything with cars. And maybe in a smaller Chinese city, it's just easier to drive. It's something that has definitely been an issue in the former Soviet Union, where they have metros in all of the smaller cities, but the ridership is kind of terrible. And for example, in the Baltic states, they never ended up building metros, but the tramway and the trolleybus systems kind of collapsed after communism fell, because suddenly you had all these huge roads, and as soon as people could afford cars, they just drove them. That is definitely a thing. Oh yeah. So I think that is the issue. And again, it's not the issue for Indonesia specifically, because the scaling down issue is a matter of absolute rather than relative size. You could build a full-size metro in a place like Busan. You certainly could in a place like Surabaya or Bandung. They just don't. I want to say that it's probably a combo of high construction costs in Indonesia and middle income that can't really afford them, and also maybe just less push for that because they're less developmental than East Asia proper. But I genuinely don't know. Because evidently Taiwan, despite having kind of obscene construction costs, did end up building metros, and a lot of heavy commuter rail infrastructure in its secondary cities, and then it kind of disappointed, so they're not maybe doing that as much anymore. It might also be political, like green versus blue there, just because southern Taiwan is a very green area. But I don't know. I could do an entire video about what LA needs to do, and to an extent I already did several. problem with doing pure S-Bahn in LA, so because I said it'll take questions, let's talk about this for a sec. The issue with doing pure S-Bahn in LA is that here is where the S-Bahn in LA would be able to take you. So downtown LA, it doesn't have through tracks, but an S-Bahn would, and current plans already do include through tracks, so that's not the problem. The mainline trains take you north with two branches, one that goes through here and thence to Antelope Valley, the other diagonally through the valley floor. There is the San Bernardino line, which does this. I believe passenger trains have the single track in the median of the I-10, and this is freight only, despite this serving more like small centers that they could be using. I think it then goes like this, and then wends its way to San Bernardino. There's a line to Riverside, I'm forgetting the route, but it's very weak. And then there is the line to Orange County that runs where the intercities run. This runs into such problems as, you see all of this, that's not getting served. Like this is not a system that serves anything urban within LA, because it's not even good for service through downtown because of the location of Union Station at the edge. Except what, Glendale? Like, I think Glendale is the only, maybe Burbank if you count that. But these are the only these are the only urban-ish places that are being served on the main lines. There is a lot of still active manufacturing along the lines, so it's not even something that you can very easily TOD. It's useful for regional connections, but there's an entire west side to LA. Lots of jobs there, not just residents. There's this entire direction. So no, they could not have done pure S-Bahn in LA. S-Bahn in LA, I think, is useful as an additional tool for service to certain places, especially at long distance, in lieu of extending the Gold Line beyond Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley toward, I'm not even sure, I think all the way to the county line at this point with the Foothills extension. So that is kind of drunk, but service to Pasadena needs to exist. East LA, South LA, the airport. I mean, yeah, you could turn this into an S-Bahn corridor, but it would be, I mean, not greenfield or anything, but it would need a lot of work, almost regional metro-like. And so, and again, the west side, really important. So yeah, that's the issue with LA. This is why, like, that's the problem with doing pure S-Bahn in LA. Remember, LA was not a large city when the mainline rail lines were being built in the United States, so it has a woefully undersized mainline rail network for its size, and this is also true of Dallas and Houston, to a large extent also Atlanta. Yeah, the problem with linking LA, Oaks, and the Inland Empire together is the Inland Empire's existence is exurbs of LA, so it's not like there's any reason for a solid internal to the Inland Empire transit system to exist. Oh, the comment on that. Is there any point to retaining peak through ops on the extreme ends? Assuming full electrification, yes, because if you don't, then what happens with the trains that go there? Because if these trains share tracks on outer but not extreme outer segments, then they participate in the through running system, so they might as well be part of it rather than reverse branching to some terminal tracks at Grand Central or the Long Island City terminals, the LAR or whatever. In these cases, they need to just be viewed as trains that go farther out once in a while. So instead of a train that goes, so think of them as a train that goes to, let's say, north back lanes to southeast, or even Babylon, but then one train in a few goes farther out, which has its own problems because these trains still have their own identity, so they're not as easily replaceable, but to some extent they are. I mean, if you're making a scheduling assumption that the purpose of the system is to do through running between Babylon and wherever these trains end up, which if it's like a very heavily built system would probably be something through Lower Manhattan and then up to this part of Jersey. And then you want to say that a train every, I don't know, hour or half hour goes beyond that. Like maybe a train every half hour to Patchogue and then a train every hour to Montauk. And then and you can just make a scheduling decision that if a Babylon train is delayed, then the priority will be even headways on the Babylon branch, like on the middle section of this line, and of course making sure that the delays don't propagate through the tunnel, through the central tunnel, to the point that you might say, okay, this train that was supposed to go to Montauk will instead terminate in Babylon. Take the next train if you want to go to Montauk. So you need to be kind of brutal about this. Potentially, and the same is true with Southeast here in Wassaic. But if the train service is run, they should not terminate. Either use them as forced transfers, so you say that everyone gets off at Southeast or Babylon, and the rest can just and then transfer to a shorter train that goes to the end. But don't do the thing where the middle section, so things like White Plains to Southeast or something like Rockville Center to, not Rockville Center, Valley Stream to Babylon is a section with track sharing with throning and non-throning trains, because you're kind of repeating the problem of both, because you have the problem of throning, that the system is more complex and delays propagate more, and you also have the non-throning problem of the trains don't throne. Okay. San Bernardino has enough population to warrant a small suburban metro of its own, and absolutely no job centralization. The question is not just who would ride the metro, but where would they go on that metro, and in a place like San Bernardino or Riverside or Ontario, the answer is downtown LA. But then you need to start with a regional and only then fill in intersuburban. Meanwhile, the Fukudashi line, oh yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Short run streams to produce 2-minute service. So, I mean, they do it in Munich. The mention S-Bahn does that with let's call it moving block signaling or communication-based train control, even though the signals in the mentioned S-Bahn tunnel are not at all moving block, they're fixed block. They're just fixed block with with the minimum size that is smaller than the length of the train. Which essentially provides moving block signaling capabilities with an inherently fixed block system. That has an actual moving block system with similar capabilities. So you can do that already. The trick is that you want to not have insane. You don't want to have insane level of branching. Levels of branching. You don't want insane levels of branching, but there are 7 branches on each side in Munich. And on the it's less than. It's in theory 2 in the east, 3 in the west, but There are some express local patterns, so I think in practice it is 3 patterns on each side of peak. I'm forgetting where it is peak. No, because again, in, nothing internal to the Inland Empire or the Orange County or Orange County would succeed except as feeders unless there's a lot of secondary city formation in San Bernardino and Riverside and Anaheim and Santa Ana. Yeah. I mean, it's possible. Usually I assume 24 trains per hour because I don't like making huge assumptions around the absolute top of the lines. The same reason why I could get you much shorter trip times with the high-speed rail project between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington if I assumed absolute best performance, and instead I usually do second best. So instead of doing a timetable based only on Shinkansen trains or on tilting Talgos, I'm assuming just next generation Velaros, the ones that, unbeknownst to me at the time I started this, are being procured by Brightline West and therefore are going to be familiar to the American operating environment, and vice versa. The assumed cant efficiency are the highest on non-tilting systems. But for example, I'm not saying even they should do 200 millimeters cant only 180, which is again a bunch of second bests. Just to avoid having things that are kind of limiting cases that might not generalize. And this is why I'm assuming 24, not 30 trains per hour with these throttling scalars. I mean, what do you mean would be? It's 24 trains per hour is the current peak capacity. Is not capacity? It's actual peak throughput in the North River tunnels. The Americans are capable of that right now. They're doing it right now. It's not a weird corner case for them. Now Penn Station does have a lot of tracks where the trains can turn, but these tracks, but that's irrelevant with the tunnel. I would say so they can push a lot of trains through a tunnel. They're then not very good at turning them on a timely basis, but that's a separate thing. Yeah. Okay, now I want to talk about this. So I asked the same question that I asked on Mastodon and on Blue Sky on Twitter, and I did get some questions. So, okay, this I did not see when I started. So Omer, who also saw this on Blue Sky and for some reason chose to answer here. Omer, I love you, but you know which network it's easier to find me on. High-speed fares comparison between Europe and Asia. So my understanding is that Chinese fares are basically European, maybe a little lower. Japanese fares are higher and fixed because you can look them up in a table. French ones are dynamic and airline style. German fares are slightly higher than French fares, like very slightly. I think it's at this point something like in PPP dollars, not euros. I think it's 17 versus 15 cents per passenger kilometer, and then Japan's like 24. And again, this is all domestic. The fares on, as I mentioned before, on Eurostar and Thalys are higher, geared toward business travelers, which has led to a long-term collapse in mass political willingness to push for inter-member state high-speed rail in Europe among people who don't vote Volt, or are myself. I don't vote Volt, I vote Green. But the only person who votes Green other than Volt who cares about this. I love Volt, but they're also a tiny party. So that's I think the biggest comparisons actually on Europe versus Asia. It's domestic versus international Europe. In Asia, again, higher, and by Asia I mean rich Asia, so Japan, I think South Korea and Taiwan are basically the same on this. It's somewhat higher fares. They're fixed. Um, in Japan, they can't really lower the fares because they're at capacity at uh, rush hour and much of not rush hour. I guess they could introduce lower off-peak fares. That might be cool. Um, because they do have a pretty prominent peak, a usual like a business rush hour peak, which is a lot of commuters using the Shinkansen. The number of trains per hour on the Tokaido Shinkansen off peak is not that high. I believe it is for Nozomi to Ikari to Kodama. Maybe one of the two slower patterns is 102 per hour, so it's 708. Rush hour is about 15. So it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. I think it's a similar ratio north of Tokyo, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's even higher, I'm not sure. And I know the ridership is big here, north of Tokyo, and it's much more commuter oriented. The average trip length on the Tohoku Shinkansen such Jatsu is shorter than the Tokaido. But the so maybe JR Central could introduce again still fixed fare table, just saying that if you take the train within a certain window of times, then you get cheaper fares. But but again they can't meaningfully lower the peak fares because the trains are full and the tracks are full. Yeah, but that's not the same as price discrimination. That's not different people are paying different fares for the same for functionally identical seats on the same train. This is people paying the same fares for these seats on these trains, but different fares on different trains based on well telegraphed in advance time of day, which is very different. Oh, 5 Nozomi to Hikari 1 Kodama. Okay, last I looked it was 422, but I looked years ago. And these are not very stable timetables. Yeah, so they're already doing price discrimination by charging somewhat lower fares on Hikari and Kodama, and having the rule where the Japan Railway Pass only covers Hikari and Kodama, so that the tourists don't take the Nozomi, because the tourists are assumed to have more free time and also to be taking the Shinkansen partly as a tourist railway, just to be able to say that they took the train, so might as well shove them on the train where they get to be on the train for 3 hours, not 2.5. Yeah, I can see that. But, I mean, JR East is not doing that either. And JR East, if anything, has a stronger case for doing that because so much high-speed commuting. Again, it's just I don't think they feel like they need to do that in Japan. They have pretty heavy competition with airlines, but really inter-island. Their core markets are not at all competitive, so I think they just don't. It's just, I mean, it's not JR Central was born on third base. Just all of them are kind of monopolists, so they don't think. Oh, interesting. There's no extra Kodama. I mean, wait. What about the Kodama? What about the P Kodama that go only Mishima to Tokyo? Huh. Anyway, so that's a thing about Europe versus Asia high-speed fare comparisons. You do want to have more fixed fares. I don't know if Germany strikes a good middle because Germany does have a little bit of price discrimination, and sometimes it's kind of weird, like the special faster ITSEs that are supposed to be for business travelers a little bit more expensive or sometimes a little bit cheaper instead. It's kind of weird. But so the idea of doing it through a table lookup is good, but again, if you're getting to the point of having too much of a peak, and especially capacity peak, that's when you want to maybe do special peak, off-peak fares. So in the Northeast Corridor, I don't think that they will need to do that, just because of how the city sizes and the city distances are. That the kind of like there's always going to be some kind of peak there. I think I shouldn't say there. I mean Boston here, where Omer lives, which is the United Kingdom. I don't know. I mean, I'm imagining that the fares are going to end up doing a high-speed tour are going to be TGV style because that's what they know. It's not a good thing. I actually can see peak off peak. Just a table of just a dumb table like in Japan, but with differences between peak and off peak. I think that would work very well for the UK and also honestly for France, just because commuting to the primary city is so important in all of these three countries: the UK, France, Japan. Um, Unfortunately, the way that actual rail fares work in the UK is that okay. Yeah, okay. I guess there's been this joke about the UK, it's recycled like Soviet era jokes about communism, that someone is trying to book an appointment with a doctor in the NHS, and they say there's a long line, there's a long wait, so come back in 5 years, and this person says morning or afternoon, and they say why does it matter, and this person says well my train is exactly in 5 years in the morning. There is this thing where the price discrimination on railways in the UK has gotten really obscene. Like it's a lot of this kind of too clever by half business analyst types who can much more easily measure the benefits of this than the costs in public support, public sentiment, on a system that will always rely on some kind of public support. Doesn't even have to be subsidies. It can just be public support for telling the kind NIMBYs of the children's, no, you don't get a tunnel. I think that matters. I don't think it's exactly pseudo-privatization, because SNCF does that while also resisting any actual privatization. A lot of it is monopoly behavior makes you dumb. JRs do that, but I think in some cases so does SNCF. Not dumb in the sense of charging the fares that were being charged in Italy and in Spain pre-competition, but dumb in the sense of not questioning your own beliefs about how to run trains. In the case of Japan, it's the fares. In the case of France, it's the shove maximum human mass between a provincial city and Paris and don't try to build an ever-traveler network. And to be fair, Germany has some of that as well, with opposite views of what is important and what isn't important. So speed in Germany is not as important, is not viewed as important by Deutsche Bahn, whereas there's an obsession with everywhere to everywhere, which is kind of supported by the elements of civil society that are most pro-trains, because these elements take the train everywhere. So do I. It's just that I happen to live in Berlin, and as an immigrant, I don't have a deep network of friendships in provincial Germany. So if I take trains in Germany, I take them to a place that I might want to visit, and for me, that would be another big city. But people born in Germany in my social possession tend to be the types that would take the train between not just Berlin and Köln or Berlin and München, but between I can't even extemporaneously think about two sufficiently random places, but I don't know, just to name places of the hometowns of two people I know through Berlin queer meetups. Both of them vote green. Remscheid and Münster. So it's people who would take. So these are not two people that know each other very well. The Münster person and the Remscheid person. If they did, and for some reason they were back home in towns that they kind of don't think much of because they prefer Berlin, then they would take trains between Remscheid and Münster, where pretty much everyone else drives. These are not places that like have even Berlin Mitte levels of voting green, let alone actual majority voting green. Everyone doesn't vote green, which just drives. So yeah, regional trains between two towns like this, it's fine, but that's not the priority, I don't think. Yeah, another question. So Hulu, who, I mean, is born German, but is Köln, not Remscheid or Ermenstad, asks me about transit to stadiums. Okay. So stadiums I've actually written about, and that is the boundary between the transit city and the suburbs. With a typo, but Google is smart enough to be able to go through typos, to correct typos. So this is what I wrote about this over 5 years ago. The issue is that stadiums, so let's talk about stadiums as places. Stadiums have the following features, which differ from, let's say, when I take the train to board games, or when I take the train to a bisexual meetup. The first is that stadiums are unspecialized in the sense of who uses them. Everyone uses them. If it's for sports, then there is one really important demographic difference between who goes to them and who doesn't, which is men go to sports games much more so than women. Men and women do not live in separate places. Gender is, spatially speaking, completely irrelevant. Now, women also take public transportation consistently more than men do, and they walk more than men do. The differences are significant, but not so huge that they would drive the difference with stadium-oriented public transportation. And stadiums are also used for very large concerts. Because stadiums are the largest place for gathering in a city, usually the biggest acts will go to a stadium, and often when a sufficiently large star tours, they will even say that the tour is all stadium, just because concert halls are not large enough for, let's say, the Eras Tour. So someone like Taylor Swift would, I think does for the Eras Tour, only do stadiums because you can put 50,000 people in one place at a stadium, whereas concert halls are, I think, maximum 4 figures, maybe very, very, very low 5 figures. And of course, these are not at all male biased. If anything, Taylor Swift has a, I think, predominantly female fan base. So first of all, there's no relevant demographic difference to who goes there. Whereas, for example, who goes to queer meetups? Well, obviously queers, but queers as a community have specific neighborhoods in which we live. They tend to be more central. They tend to be more left-wing. Actually, I think that they're more consistently left-wing than they are central. They are, I mean, queer public transport usage is high enough that there is a gays can't drive meme. And queers also tend to socialize. I mean, especially if it's queer, if it's something that's deliberately queer, socializing with other queers. The thing is, most people are straight, and the upshot is that if the, I mean, if it's, I mean, much of Europe, I mean, the same people build the railway and the stadium, which is the state. Is it queers? I can't exactly tell you what proportion of people are queer because different surveys will give you different numbers. there's quite a lot of people who are bisexual, but largely date, but are cis and largely date het and are usually not making a concerted effort to date same-sex. And then and for such and then they also and people like that also don't usually socialize with other queers disproportionately. So people like, let's call them socialized queer. So people who are LG. Yeah, I know. Let's say it's about 10% of the population. So what this means is that so for you, for example, what is the size of queer London? The answer is London divided by 10. So so it's like what, 900,000 people. A bit more if you include queers who very sadly live in the home counties. For me in Berlin, it is 300 and I mean maybe Berlin is such a queer center that the proportion is a little higher, but it's still we're talking about 400,000 people. So the point is that for queers, cities are not that big. Queer New York is 2 point something million people, including the suburbs. So about the size of, I don't know, straight Stockholm or straight Praga. And so smallness. It also leads to metropolitan area-wide socialization. Often this means that these places are central because, as I said, these are groups that have lower car use. They tend to be pretty left-wing, which matters for public transport choice in Europe. I'm not sure how much it does in the United States. It's much more enforced by where you work because no matter how right-wing you are, if you work in Manhattan, you're probably not driving. No matter how left-wing you are, if you're working in a place that's not a big city center, you are driving. I have heard complaints, for example, from a Swiss math professor about going on sabbatical at the University of Michigan and people treating them like they were weird when they were trying to bike to work in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor is very left-wing. So for someone with like European mentality, Ann Arbor would be a very transit and bike-oriented places. It would not be a place, it would be a place. It would be a very transit-oriented and bike-oriented place, and it absolutely is not. So this also leads to a lot of centralization. And the point is that stadiums aren't like that. Therefore, they need to be for everyone. So they need to be a compromise between transit connections and car connections. I don't think it's a coincidence that the IKEAs in Berlin follow the same logic of being accessible both ways. The IKEAs. So Berlin has 3 IKEAs, of which I think one is pure car, one is in Spandau, and the one that we actually use to accessorize the apartment is a few minutes walk from Südkreuz. Not exactly adjacent, it is kind of annoying to drag heavy cardboard, cardboard containing heavy furniture from IKEA to Südkreuz, but given sufficiently dedicated and sufficiently masochistic transit users, it is absolutely possible. But there's also a giant parking lot. And that's the rub with stadiums. Like, you cannot do a very city center stadium because some people will need to drive there. It's also the next thing is it's also very land intensive. A bar where a bunch of queer people talk about things, and they talk about like how, to me, there's no difference between dating men and dating women, but maybe there is a difference between dating bi men and dating gay men. That is that is ordinarily a neighborhood norm, or a neighborhood community space, and the opposite is that stadiums can only be used. Stadiums are again for concerts. I guess there was a time when you could do mass political rallies there, but at this point, no. Wait, what? Okay, I'm not sure whether you're asking about the special car for straight boyfriends or, yeah. Or about me and like the difference between dating bi men and dating gay men. I mean, they're not literally women only, but so yeah. Anyway, so stadiums, because they're so land intensive, you can put them in city centers, but it's not always a good choice. And actually, I had this conversation in which I was uncertain than Fifth Square people were much more certain about this. There were plans to replace some of the Market East complex slash Reading, I guess Reading Terminal at this point. Or not at this point. Originally, Reading Terminal and then the station kind of became Market East. I guess now it's Old Jefferson. Of replacing some of this with a stadium of, I'm forgetting which sport, maybe basketball, which is kind of the least land intensive, and even that is not the highest and best use in city center. It's just not used intensively enough. So you kind of have to put it some ways away, so often it's going to be at the end of a line. So in Philly, this is here. Now, this is probably not optimal, but it is pretty close to the subway. Would be nice if it were not here, but here, or if this, or if Pattison were like remotely walkable rather than this, rather than looking like it's a level in War Thunder or something. And now people actually play War Thunder will yell at me that I haven't played enough War Thunder, by which I mean I've never played War Thunder. And the point is that often, so yeah, you can improve stadium placement. At the end of the day, the stadiums can't be in the best transit oriented places. So often you want to put them at the edge of lines, at the ends of lines, kind of the edge of the area that's recognizably urban, because they will need parking. You want or maybe if you have a solid, so tying back to what Toronto was saying about LA to Inland Empire, somewhere in between would be a good example, because in Berlin, for example, where is Olympiastadion? It is on the line between Berlin proper and Spandau. So this is something that pre-exists with regional needs, because again, Spandau. So this is actually a pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good location for this stadium, because then it's pretty close to the train. So often, now even then, it's not the best location, and it's not very easy to have a line that will go through it if it's a new line. I mean, yeah, they built this, but but this is kind of awkward. I mean, the distance between the U-Bahn and the stadium for that reason. Like, there's a reason these are not great connections. You can make them better. I don't think you can make them very good, because again, land intensive, needs to be accessible to drivers and not just to transit users. You can maybe do them in an urban renewal zone, like Stratford, but Stratford is many things, but it is not very central. Yeah, you can do underground. You can do underground car parks, but at the scale we're talking about, they are going to be vast, and I mean, yeah, you can do underground car parks if you want something the scale of Monaco. Like, yeah, in Monaco there's a ton of underground car parks for everything, which is viable because have you seen how filthy rich Monaco is? What's on the Vic? Oh, the queers only. Also Greece. Okay, which part of Greece is, oh my god, Borners? Because there are several things, there are several conversation threads here, and I'm not sure what you're talking about. oh, Thessaloniki and Athena. Sure, you can do underground parking at that. Um, but I think for the scale of uh, okay, maybe not this because this is still London. Certainly for an American, like the thing that I showed in from Philadelphia. At some point, you are overwhelming construction costs, construction capabilities. Um, and then you need to also and it's not just parking because you also need to get the cars into city center. It again, it's something that works in Monaco because in Monaco the tidal commuting is often not by car, because the help does not commute by car. The help either takes the bus from Beausoleil if they're poor, or if they're not that poor, and if they're in France legally, they take the train from, for example, Menton. And then the cars are for consumption. They're not for work, and so it's much less peaky. Where people are driving to whatever high-end consumption that they do. That's the other thing. And yes, you can also build underground freeways, but in some cities do. But again, it's extremely tidal with stadiums because everyone leaves at the same time. And this is where and you do want to avoid this being one giant traffic jam. So this is where you need locations that are not the best. You can make them better if they're between two things, or if they're in urban renewal zones, again Stratford, where you're already building several public transport lines. So Stratford is on what is on that's on the Jubilee Crossrail. Is it on other things? Is it on the district? No, this isn't. So it's, I guess, on the Elizabeth line. Oh, the overground and again the Jubilee is there, I believe. Again, not bad for this, but it is kind of a schlep for much of the rest of the city. That is kind of inherent to serving stadiums. It's not something that you can very easily avoid. DLR. Oh, it's on the central line. Oh, right. For some reason Oh, yeah, fair. So you need more suburban access stations. Yes, but that is something that heavily depends on random factors that are specific to your city. You can't just say, this shall be a suburban nexus. That is to say, you can create a new town. Let's call this new town Cergy, but it will not be, that will not turn into a suburban nexus. Like, you need it to be big enough for people to have reasons to go in multiple directions, and also central enough that it is viable for there to be trains from several directions. Again, not Cergy or Marne-la-Vallée. So you need to be closer in. Again, Stratford is a good example, better than I thought because I forgot about the central line. Saint-Denis, La Défense. Berlin kind of doesn't have these because Berlin has a bunch of these nexuses. For someone who talks a lot about and watches a lot of StarCraft, I should know the plural of nexus, but apparently okay, yeah, so the plural is nexus. Okay. Oh, it is nexi? The plural? The plural is not. Oh, that is. Oh, no, that's adjective. Yeah, no, the plural is nexus. Okay, so the nexus of the. So the nexus in Berlin, they're all on or within the ring. So Berlin does not really have a Stratford. It just has a lot of, I don't know what to even call them in London terms. King's Cross and Pancrases, Waterloos, London Bridges, Victorias, West Ends. Oh, Right. Sorry, I'm just not. I usually don't think about Essex much. Um. Yeah. 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 So again, it's something that you can't just plan around. Whereas a circular metro line, you absolutely can pre-plan. Now, Berlin doesn't need one because it has the ring, but Paris, it built several. It built the Metro 2 and 6 ring, T3. It's now building M15. You can actually build an urban ring, uh, but something farther out. Certainly, if you're trying to connect various suburban nexus, then uh, okay. I know we're trying not to think about Essex, but in the election, Labour is at least going to win win Essex this time, right? Because that's going to be hilarious. Um, Having Essex vote for Keith. Uh, yeah. Anyway, so uh, so the bottom line is that generally things that you want to do, if you want to do suburban new towns and have them be transit-oriented centers, it's actually difficult, unless they're very close in, like La Défense. Uh, in Stockholm, I mean, they built Kista, but I don't think Kista is meaningfully a suburban nexus. It is an edge city in one direction. It is not very easily accessible from the others. Um, it's not even that easily accessible from adjacent directions, from adjacent, I don't know what to call them, wedges, by car, because it's kind of a weird thing. Like you would expect that the edge city, in this case, Kista here, would be easily drivable from where the rich people live, which is this suburban tract, Danderud and so on. But there's a lake in between. So I guess they can drive around and that's more convenient, but it's not like it's adjacent and a very easy drive from the richest suburb, which again, Danderud. Um, like the old Roslax, the whole Roslack region is kind of the rich suburban part of Stockholm. Um, and so again, doing all this is hard. Doing the stadium would be hard. In the Rhine-Ruhr, I guess because it's more polycentric, it's easier to do things. But then the Rhine-Ruhr has garbage public transit ridership by the standards of a metro area that size. Which in Europe, I guess in Europe, there are four others that are monocentric: London, Paris, Istanbul, Moskva. Um, I don't know the model split in Istanbul. Istanbul is kind of weird for other reasons. Moskva, London, Paris all have way stronger public transport than the Rhine-Ruhr. Um, anyway, are there other questions? So as I said, there's the wedding, so I can't be here forever. Are there any uh, further questions? Because I think I addressed everything people asked me on social media. Um, it is kind of weird that people say it's the most working class because it is not the poorest, because the income, as of when Eurostat stopped looking at incomes in the United Kingdom, Kent was poorer than Essex. My understanding is that the difference is that Kent is where the lower middle class suburbanized, and Essex is where the East End like the industrial East End working class suburbanized. But it's not exactly poor. I would say that it's more people with a "we're not poor" ID poll. And we're going to prove it by driving a lot and voting Tory. It's what I said, I think, last time about the issue with 40th percentile earners who compare themselves with the 20th percentile and not with any higher percentile. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, sure, but also, gerrymandering or not, Kent is poorer than Essex. Um, um, but anyway, are there questions? Oh, I see what you, yeah, okay. Gelsenkirchen is weird because I think you're the one who taught me that for all the for all the people look down on Gelsenkirchen because it's like the most AfD voting part of West Germany that's not like south. Um, it is run by SPD, um, which is very much not Essex. Essex voted Maggie, like Essex man voted Maggie. Uh, so Gelsenkirchen is, I mean, at least of when the stereotype developed, um, has a large minority that is very right wing, and Essex has a majority that is at least somewhat right wing. Yorkshire man voted Boris, but that was one election. Um, Previously, Yorkshire voted. I mean, rural Yorkshire, sure, but urban Yorkshire didn't, and there are. I mean, I won't say they're coming back, but like at this point, like Rishi Sunak's immediate. I want to say Rishi Sunak's immediate family is not going to vote for him, but I'm not sure if they're entitled to vote. Um, is there any good use for the third tracks in a Post Express commuter rail network? No. I mean, yeah, actually there is one, which is the third track technically produces more separation between the track in one direction and the track in another direction, so you can do work on one track without disturbing the other. But that does not generate any value compared with having two tracks with abnormally large distance between track centers. Yeah, I mean, yeah, at this point, I mean, we're all, like, mocking how the Tories might not even be the official opposition this time. And then we'll see what comes out of, you know, the Labour majority of 300%. Anyway, are there questions? Are there more questions? This does not appear to be a long lag. I want to be done 2:30. Oh, yeah, fair, that too. Yeah. I mean, yeah, so so the other wealthy suburbs that are, how's the high-speed rail project going? Pretty well. We are going to start posting right-of-way maps and speed maps, likely next week. Yeah, if we're gonna do a solo case, then definitely. Not so much for high-speed rail, just because the high-speed rail project is so what if Germany, but in an American context. It's not that you talk too much about LA, it's that you ask me questions about LA and sometimes they answer and sometimes they don't have time. I wouldn't call it talking too much. You want to talk about someone who talks too much? Hi. Like, you remember that YouTube videos are supposed to be 5 minutes, not an hour and a half? See, when I think about talking too much, I don't think about LA. I think about New York has a very verbal culture. I mean, yeah. Yeah, but on the other hand, 1.3 billion for Arterie. Oh, for modernization of Frankfurt to Mannheim. Aren't they also building? I thought they were building the high-speed connection between them for not much more than that. Rhein-Main. It's not spelled that way. Rhein-Main, Rhein-Neckar. I thought it used to be called Rhein-Main, Rhein-Neckar, not Frankfurt-Mannheim. Neuigkeiten. What did they say? Didn't they say they were supposed to have a price tag by last year? Ablehnen, thank you very much. Planungsstellen Gesamtprojekt. Are they actually gonna say something about the cost of this? Okay. These are old numbers, I believe. I'm kind of curious what the present day ones are. but kind of weird also that they're building the new line so slowly that they can't delay the modernization until after they complete the new line and then can just do the modernization without disturbing the traffic. Because I know that they had to um, divert a lot of trains and slow them, and which was I think they get 30, maybe 40-minute overall delay. Um, Riedbahn. Yes, I understand it's very big, but I mean very very big. Anyway, so the answer is I can't really tell you about the modernization project, except that again I do find it a little weird that they couldn't delay it until they completed the new line. Um, anyway, are there more questions? Because if not, then we should break. Could be an hour and a half recording. We have 4 more minutes. Not mass. Oh, okay. Infrastructure week. If there's anybody using a flexible dispatch. Oh. Oh, I see what you mean. Not that I'm aware of. The reason is that the I mean how you will need a stable of these trains to be able to do that, and they're rather likely to delay the intercity if they make more than a handful of stops. So you can do track sharing between mostly segregated track intercities and very local segregated tracks other than the little track sharing S-Bahn, like very A-type, A-type S-Bahn service. We are exploiting that for the high-speed rail project with a little bit of track sharing between the most local New York commuter rail line, which is the Port Washington branch, and the high-speed trains for a little bit. But anything more than that, really, I mean, the trains are still going to delay each other, so it's not really, like, I don't think this is viable for this. Also separately, hydrogen technology is garbage. Germany had to abandon it despite the, like, chest thumping about Technologie Offenheit, just because it didn't work and there was mild corruption involved in even looking at it. Will ChatGPT solve Amtrak's management issue? Has ChatGPT solved any problem except how to cheat on your essays better? Wait, where? Oh, interactieve kaarten. Yeah, so that means that in the shared segment you cannot have stations, which is fine. The track sharing that I mentioned is the tunnel toward Penn Station. So yeah, there's one tunnel. There is one station, which is called Penn Station. Anyway, so thank you all for tuning in, despite the lack of a specific topic. Thank you for the questions. For example, oh yeah, or that too, same thing, which is in fact the case for what we're doing with Amtrak. Because they, wait, what? Yeah. Yeah, that's weird misinformation. It sounded like I don't know, stuff like the Pope endorses Donald Trump is something that I think required handmade fake news from 2016. But anyway, thank you all for watching. I know it's been kind of all over, but that's true of all the videos, even the themed ones. I will see you in probably a week. So thank you all for watching, and ciao ciao.